Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the GTSRL Season 36. My name's Paul TX141 Walsh, and I'll be your host as always as we take a look at another round of Ultimate Action as brought to you this time from EU Division 1. Now, last time out, we saw some frantic Group 4 action around Interlagos, where the restriction was that all of our drivers were expected to use front-engine rear-wheel drive cars in the Group 4 category, and the majority of our drivers, if not all, went for the Jaguar F-Type, and then there were a couple of Dodge Vipers. The Dodge Vipers not doing too well in EU Division 1, but the F-Type drivers doing exceptionally well, and it really started to pave a way, I should say, in our standings in terms of who's hot and who's not as we've gone into round number 2. But of course today, things are a little bit different. We've got to change of track, and we've also got to change of drivetrain. We're over in Japan at the Tsukuba circuit. It is 8 o'clock in the morning currently, and on top of that we are now switching over to all-wheel drive drivetrain cars. So what does that mean? In short, it means we are now looking at cars which are four-wheel drive, i.e. the drive application when the throttle pedal is applied goes to all four wheels rather than the rear two wheels, and it's all four wheels that are applying the power and also working as hard as possible to provide the ultimate grip to complete the ultimate lap. And at Tsukuba, a circuit that's focused primarily on handling and has very limited straights, if at all any really. It's only really the run from turns 8 to 9, which is a major straight. We're going to be seeing there's going to be a focus on nailing apexes and also getting the best possible exit out of each corner leading up to the next one. We'll talk more about the cars as we go into it. Let's take a look at some of the drivers and talk a little bit about where the standings currently are. So without further ado then, as we welcome those of you in the stream chat immediately, so Jerry Race Car Drive and also MDC and anybody else who's tuning in, of course, hope you're all doing well and having a good day. We start off with our championship leader currently, who we will need to have a quick flick around to find him. In fact, I believe he's just turned up at the paddock, but he's not out on the circuit currently, and that is Olaf, who is sitting on 49 points. We will come and find Olaf when we get the opportunity to. But Olaf is currently leading the championship on 49 points, and picked up the maximum points haul from round number 1. So that was 3 wins in a row. Then second place in the championship right now is from Switzerland, Yannick 2000, also known as Yannick B. Now Yannick today is bringing the Subaru WRX. And Yannick had a very good debut, what with season 36 being his debut season. He had a fantastic start to the season, what with the fact he picked up 2 second places in races 1 and 2 and a 3rd place in race number 3. Wasn't quite able to pull off a trio of second places to keep him right in the fight against Olaf immediately going into this race, but still Yannick is not too far off our championship leader, only 5 points off our championship leader, and best poised to go into this one with a lot of pace behind him. Now in 3rd place currently in the standings, he's currently not at the paddock. That would be one Kranic Opel, the Australian, sitting on 41.5 points. Kranic having a very increasing turn of fortunes throughout the whole of round number 1, in the fact that he was only able to pick up a 5th place in race number 1, but then cemented that and compounded it with a 3rd place in race number 2, and finally a 2nd place in race number 3, putting him on that good points haul, so only 2.5 points off of Yannick. And then you have to go down to 38 points for 4th place, currently held by D31, who also is not at the circuit currently, and the Dutchman not being available at the moment for spectating. But he's doing a rather great job in 4th place in the championship at the moment, seeing a good set of fortunes throughout round number 1. We then move over to our 5th place driver in the championship at the moment, and that is one Ben MK, the British driver currently running around also in the Subaru WRX. Now Ben is sitting on 37.5 points, only half a point off of D in 4th place at this point in time. Ben, on his debut as well in season 36, had a very good opening set of races, his best result being the 4th place in race number 1, and then being matched of course by 4th place in race number 3. And we wish Ben all the best for tonight's races. And then you've got a sizable jump down to 6th place in the championship, currently being held on to by one Johnny Powell, who also drives under the name. Just give me 2 seconds to dig out Johnny's alternative name here, folks. As we're just watching Ben MK make his way through turn number 3 and up into 4. So Johnny Powell, also known as Phil the Vibes, how could we forget the British driver here, also bringing the Subaru today. Johnny not having the best runs. Well, we'll call him Feel the Vibes from this point onwards. We'll use his screen name rather than his alternative name, as we say hello to more of you in the chat, including Martin BR9 and also Ben Jeed. Hope you're both doing well. And K2XR, and saying that everybody should do a Mexican wave. Well, I'm technically doing one here, you just can't see it. I think that's what everybody will be saying on the other end of their screens. But Feel the Vibes, coming back to our driver of focus. So he had a good set of races last time out, not necessarily the results he wanted, and it seemed as though the momentum came to him as he went through the races in round number 1, with only 7 points accrued from race 1, but then 9 points from race number 2, and an equivalent result with 13.5 in race number 3 for the same finishing position, which was a P6 if I remember correctly. And he's got a lot of work to put in tonight, Feel the Vibes, in order to try and move himself further up the championship standings. What have been sitting currently 8 points off of Ben MK, who's in 5th. And then if we go from Johnny down to 7th, it is Yaya, who is currently sat in 7th on 24.5 points. Yaya, of course, being one of our more infamous drivers in the GTSRL community, bringing today the Subaru WRX. And I'm hearing that Chronic Opel has just pulled up in the paddock. He's just got off the aircraft from Australia, a short haul flight this time compared to the flight over to what was Brazil last time out. But focusing on the Brit in front of us right now, Yaya sitting on those 24.5 points and had a reasonable start to season 36, but his campaign was not without difficulty, with only 6 points from race number 1, 8 points in race number 2, and then 10.5 points in race number 3. So he's got a lot of work to put in tonight if he wants to find himself moving up the championship standings and trying to get into that top 5. And 3 points behind him in the standings is one Luco33, a British driver who's running the Subaru WRX. Now Luco, on his debut in the GTSRL seasons, what of season 36, 21.5 points. He had a good opening haul. What of his first race of the evening, round 1, being his best race of the evening, 9 points for a 7th place. And then it all went a little bit pear-shaped from there. What of 5 points from race number 2 and 7.5 from race number 3. So Luku did not have the best of results as the evening went on, but he's hoping to get a good string of results together tonight, perhaps. And then only half a point behind him is a famous face amongst the community. And for those of you who are getting irritated at looking at this driver's livery, I'll explain in a minute. That is one Zenku Meister from Poland, who is running the Mitsubishi liveried Subaru WRX. If that's why you're getting irritated, it's because I first thought it was a Mitsubishi Lancer, but no, it is a Subaru. I can confirm that, even though you're going to look at that car multiple times and think that it's covered in Mitsubishi logos. No, it's a Subaru. Now he's sat on at 21 points, and really his fortunes in the opener, so round number 1, were not too great, with 5 points in race 1, 7 points in race 2 and 9 points in race number 3, just not seeming to find himself getting really too much into the overall fight in the opening set of races. But it wasn't a combo that Zenku felt 100% happy with, whereas tonight he might be looking for a much better set of results. Especially with the field being very close together tonight, from what I'm gathering in the practice sessions, but we will come on to that in a bit. Now sat 10th in the championship standings for our drivers is one Mr. Pies, our host for this evening, and our lead driver steward. Pies currently being somewhere around in the lobby. I think he's probably just skulking around in the paddock right now. In fact, yep, here he is. Also running the Subaru from the United Kingdom, of course, Pies. And having very mixed fortunes in the opening 3 races that were round 1. 3 points and 4 points from the first 2, making a total of 7, and then 12 points in race number 3 for that 6th place finish. So, well, not for that 6th place finish, I should correct myself there, for the 7th place finish, which saw him on 19, but he's close in the fight for P8 in the championship, with only 2.5 points separating him and Luco in P8, and of course Pies is only 2 points off of Zenku. And half a point behind Pies is one Stan Lee 15 from the Netherlands. Stan Lee running in the Subaru as well as he's coming up towards turn 4 here, running a matching livery with his partner D, who we talked about a little bit earlier. And you can see that the two guys are running around on the circuit together. This is fantastic to see. And then they've got one rather odd looking Mitsubishi Subaru Lancer configuration running behind them. But focusing on Stan Lee as they go for the team photo and the team advertising, the two Dutchmen there running along. Stanley did not have the expected season opener. If anything, things went from bad to worse to Terry bad all the way throughout, in the fact that 18.5 points was not indicative of the pace that Stan had. He had a good race 1 start, but it all started to go a little bit wrong, and in the end he ended up picking up what was a P7 for 8 points, and then it started to get worse and worse in the fact that in race 2 he came home with a P9, and in race 3 with only 4.5 points to his name he was all the way down towards the rear end of the field as both Stan and his teammate move aside to let ZenQ through and then start to follow through. So we'll be wishing Stan all the best tonight and hope that he can go for a speedy recovery here to get himself back up into the championship fight standings. And then you've got 5.5 points before you come down to the Portuguese driver of Gomez, who should not be underestimated, making his debut in EU Division 1 last time out, and he's a relative newcomer to the GTSRL community, albeit he started in season 35. Gomez did not have the best of evenings, only picking up 13 points in total and not really having any results to shout home about, but of course we'll be hoping that he can move up a little bit tonight. And having just joined, we hear that he's just arrived in the paddock is one Vitor Knight, currently sitting 13th in our championship standings. Vitor having a very difficult night in round number 1, in the fact that he only accrued 6 points in total and found himself right at the back for the majority of them. Gomez, we should point out, running the Subaru as well, and we're expecting Vitor to be doing the same. And then the last of our guys participating in the championship, and I believe we have a full roster tonight, which is fantastic to see, is one Ian Trebuk, who's running around in the Subaru. Now, Ian, of course, last time out was one of the limited number of drivers who decided to go for the off-meta car, potentially, which was the Dodge Viper, and found that whilst it had a poor starting sequence in the acceleration phase, it was quite a good car once you got past that deficit in terms of all-round lap pace, as was also demonstrated by Luco33, but in the end it just didn't work out for Ian, in the fact that he only picked up 4.5 points from the 3 races and finds himself at the bottom of our Drivers' Championship standings. So we're hoping that Ian can have a good one tonight, and we're just going to quickly flick over to show you Olav, who is running out in the WRX Subaru as well. So Olav, we mentioned earlier, currently being our championship leader, and we're also just going to find one Mr. Opel out on circuit so we can give you a view of what car he'll be running. And it is, of course, the Subaru, but there's his livery with the Rockstar star on the rear and the yellow stripe over the black. And I believe that is everybody introduced with regards to individual drivers. Now, in terms of the championship standings, we're going to see that tonight we have got quite a close-knit battle in the championship right now. And just before we come on to that, I'm just going to quickly introduce the format for those of you who are tuned in. This is your first time for tuning in to the GTSRL. At 8 o'clock this evening, so in 18 minutes time, we are going to be doing qualifying. It's a 12-minute open session where all of our drivers will have 12 minutes to put in the best possible lap with fuel and tyre wear active. And then after that, it is going to be 3 races back to back. 2 10-minute length races, which will consist of 10 laps each. Tyre wear will be a concern in those races probably towards the end, and then a 20-minute race in race number 3, where it's 21 laps around this circuit. And in terms of the grid for race number 1 will be based on qualifying, and the grids for races 2 and 3 will be based on finishing position in the previous race, where if you finish in first place, you will start on pole for the next race. So it's all about getting as far up the field as humanly possible and see what you can do. But nonetheless, one key thing to note here as well is the fact that in none of the races fuel is a concern. Obviously you will want to try and burn as much fuel as possible in qualifying because you want the fastest possible lap, but fuel is not a concern. What is a concern is tyre wear in race number 3, in that in races 1 and 2 none of our drivers are expected to make a pit stop. In race number 3 our drivers are expected to make a mandatory stop, but they do not have to change tyres. So if you're good at preserving your tyres, or you feel that the tyre wear is not an issue, then you can save time in the pits by not taking on new tyres. Alternatively, if you feel that tyre wear is a major issue, and that's going to be important in these cars in particular, and I'll come on to that in a little while, then you may go for a change of tyres, which may cost you somewhere in the region of 3 to 4 seconds in the pits on top of the pit stop time, as Ben MK is now going to demonstrate as he comes into the pits and goes for a fresh set of rubber here, makes the tyre change, and you can count using that timer in the centre of your screen. So this pit stop, the tyre change is approximately 5 seconds on top of just the pit stop, so that is the difference, and then you've got to make up that 5 seconds. And saving tyres did work out for a number of our drivers last time out. So that is the format, and I hope that's been explained to Pim the Unison in the chat there. And I'm sorry to hear that you're having some issues with the stream, Aaron, and hopefully those can be fixed. I know that Twitch has been a little bit awkward over the last couple of weeks and people have been experiencing issues. I've had a lot of issues with Discord tonight, so I'm having to rely on Pies to message me in-game in order to tell me if anything's happened. And I think the Discord is coming back a little bit at the moment. So it's intermittent, the issues that we're having. A number of drivers are reporting it. But we should be getting underway at 8 o'clock tonight. And we'll be getting our stuck checks underway shortly. That's where we get everybody on the grid to see if they can start the race. Just to make sure that if anybody's getting stuck on the grid, they can disconnect from the lobby, reset their internet, and then get back out there. And hopefully we can have that full complement of 14 drivers today, as we've been following Ben MK around for quite some time. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Constructors' Championship. So, who's hot and who's not in terms of the teams? Well, currently leading the championship, it is team number 7, consisting of the Australian of Chronic Opal. So we're just going to flick over to Chronic. Consists of Chronic Opal and also a Luco 33. Luco being in the pits at the moment with the Welsh liveried or Heineken liveried, or Welsh Heineken liveried, I should say, Subaru. Pardon me, Subaru. Sitting on 63 points, 4.5 points ahead of team number 5, which consists of Ben MK and Zen Q. These guys, of course, currently running around on circuit and showing good pace as always. Ben MK here for reference, and we've also got Zen NQ in the pits. Then we come to team number 4, who are only 2 points down on team 5 in the stands, sitting in P3 in the Constructors' Championship. The two Dutchmen of Stanley and D31. So we've got Stanley here, and we've also got one Monsieur D31, who is currently running around somewhere on circuit. Alternatively, he's decided to go for a pit stop break. Yep, he is here in the pits. So those are your top 3, and then only 1.5 points off of P3 in the Constructors is team number 1, consisting of your Drivers' Championship leader at the moment. That is, of course, Olaf, who's just coming through the pits as we speak. And then we've got Vitor Knight, who is his teammate. Vitor, of course, being at the flip end of the championship standings right now alongside Ian Trabuc. Vitor looking to improve on his points tally at the moment, so those guys sitting on 55 points. It's then only 1 point down to 5th place in the Constructors, which is made up of Team 2. Team 2 consisting of one Feel the Vibes, who is sat in the pits right now, coming through the pits, I believe. Yep, there he is. He's sat in the pits as we're getting stuck check number 1 underway. And then we've got Ukrainian guy, also known as Yaya777, and we'll refer to him as Yaya because that's what his username is as they're racing around on circuit today. So they're only 1 point off, so it's very close in the championship stands from P1 all the way down to P5. And then you've got a 5.5 point gap to P6, which is Team 6, consisting of Yannick 2000, who is our Swiss driver, starting in P12 for the purposes of this start check, who we will teleport the camera over to very shortly. So we've got Yannick here towards the rear of the field, and then we've got Ian Trabuc, who is currently sitting right at the back of the field. So they're both in camera shot. You can see them at the closest point of your picture. They're sitting in P6 in the Constructors' Championship together as everybody gets underway with the opening start check of the evening, and everybody has been able to pull it off their grid position perfectly. That is really good news, and that is a good omen for what is coming tonight. As everybody makes their way through turn number 1, some people have already been knocked wide. We can see some people deciding to drift their way through turn number 1 and coming into 2, 3 and 4, the next heavy braking zone, and ZenQ deciding to just chuck the car at the hairpin like it's a missile. Well, that's a very nice missile attack there from ZenQ, and they're all just simply coming through turn 5 and they'll be quitting the race. So that was a successful opening start check. And we're likely to expect at least one more start check very shortly, and then we're probably going to have another 10 minutes of practice time before qualifying gets underway. So we're just going to move the camera back out onto the circuit, of course, because we do not want to become camera locked, which can happen. And nope, we have not got the camera lock. That was a scary moment there. It can happen in GT Sport where the camera decides to just hold where it is. And of course, last in our championship standings for the Constructors at the moment is team number 3, consisting of one Mr. Pies, who is right at the front of our pit lane here. Pies and Gomez. Gomez being the Portuguese driver who's sat here at the moment in the pits as we get start check number 2 underway. So, whilst we're waiting for stock check number 2 to get underway, we are not qualifying as of the moment. Ghost, you'll need to give us 10 minutes before we get qualifying underway. What we're currently doing is a number of stock checks. The reason we're doing this as we seem to have an empty no, we're not having an empty slot at the front of the grid. We just seem to... I see, I'm losing sight of the fact that you start on the right hand side of the grid from the camera view there. It looks deceiving. We are about to get underway with the second start check. This is to make sure that, of course, everybody can pull away successfully. And we are going to watch from the front this time to get a feel for what it looks like for our faster drivers. As we can see there that Vitor Knight did jump the start a little bit and has had to pull out the way immediately. That was in the rear of the camera shot. We, of course, running the grid start with the full start check. Krynik going very deep into turn 1. And this is, of course, giving all of our drivers a feel for what it's like to do the race start, because a number of them may never have raced here before. They may have done time trial laps, or they've started with a rolling start. As we can see, Ben MK this time going for the missile manoeuvre across the second of the hairpins at turn 4. And all of our drivers now quitting out of the start check with everybody being successful. But whilst we are waiting then, and we say hello to some more individuals in the chat, including Killing Speed, KLS1, Zeronic, and we've also got Vincent Simmer 01, we've got Lerb, and we've got having a cracking time. And I hope I haven't missed anybody else in here, but I hope you're all doing well for those of you who are tuning in. And we're just waiting for qualifying ready. I think everybody will be given the thumbs up to say, and hello to Robert Dimikiro, Robert being the EU Division 2 driver that everybody loves. I indeed love seeing Robert race, and we'll be able to see him in action tomorrow evening. But now we're going to have another 9 minutes of practice because we've had 2 successful start checks. We'll probably do one more in a brief interlude period, and then qualifying will get underway. So right, let's take a moment to talk about the car and the track combination. As we can see, all of our drivers run around, and in fact we're going to hop towards one of our drivers a bit further back because it's always good to be riding on board with a driver in clear air. So, 4-wheel drive cars, Group 4. For those who are uninitiated in GT Sport, and particularly the balance of performance that is applied to Group 4 cars in general, all-wheel drive cars are those cars which, when you put your foot down and apply the throttle, the car tries to do its utmost to distribute power across the 4 wheels. Legendary cars include the Nissan GTR or the R35, cars that are known for the deployment of the power across all the wheels. However, the way GT Sport handles these cars is because the all-wheel drive model and also the equipment is seen as very heavy. As we get our third and final start check underway, what it means is these cars will feel very heavy when braking into corners, and that will typically invoke a significant amount of understeer. Now, I can talk from experience of driving the Subaru myself, as we're going to jump on board with one of our mid-pack drivers for the purposes of this start check to give you a feel for what our drivers are going to what the experience will feel like for those drivers who are starting in the mid to rear of the field. So we're going to jump on board with one Yannick 2000 for this start check. We're missing 2 individuals from this start check as well. I don't know whether that was intentional or not. So as we jump on board with Yannick here as he's about to get underway. Because these cars feel very heavy and they understeer a lot, these cars are a major challenge in terms of trying to get them round corners as quickly as possible. As Yannick gets a really nice start, they're really smooth, no wheel spin expected from any of these cars because of the all-wheel drive system. They won't need to use traction control for the line, or if they do, it will be a smidgen of traction control, if that, and everybody making it through turn 1 successfully there. But the thing to keep in mind with regards to these cars is whilst they understeer initially on corner entry, they do not follow the same model as a front engine rear wheel drive car within Group 4. Those cars have a huge amount of native understeer, and you've got to find a way of countering it in terms of either setting your brake balance accordingly or dealing with the understeer in terms of your throttle application. The trick with the all-wheel drive cars, and the Subaru is a brilliant example, and that's why it's been picked here, and that's why I think everybody's gone for the Subaru in particular, is that once you get the car to turn into the corner, the all-wheel drive system then starts to kick in. And what you find is, especially if you play around with your gear shifts as well as you're going into the corner and hitting the corner's apex, you can get the rear end of the car to start to rotate through the corner in a rather nice fashion. That's something that makes these cars different from the front engine rear wheel drive such as the Jaguar F-Type we saw last week, or tertiary the Dodge Viper or the Hyundai Genesis that we saw in EU Division 2, is the fact those cars are very front heavy through their cornering, but in return their advantage is they have a huge amount of power on the straights. Turning things upside down, in the all-wheel drive car, it's all about the handling capabilities for the most part. But of course there are exceptions to the rule. One example being, you're not going to see any of them tonight, but you may see one or two tomorrow in EU Division 2, is the Nissan GTR. It's an all-wheel drive car, but it has one of the better acceleration and top-end speeds within Group 4. However, the problem with the Nissan GTR is it is an absolute lug of a vehicle. It is probably one of the heaviest, if not the heaviest, Group 4 cars according to the GT Sport FIA Balance and Performance, which means that it has the worst tyre wear of any all-wheel drive car, and to my recollection, one of the worst tyre wears of any Group 4 if you remove front engine, front wheel drive cars from that pool of tyre wear considerations. So that's the thing that people have to keep in mind here, is when they're driving the all-wheel drive cars, these are predominantly handling cars which have a lot of initial understeer, but this will be the challenge of mastering the understeer, and Suba is a brilliant circuit to practice that, as we are now going to ride on board with Ben MK and follow him for a lap. Now Suba is a very short lap. It's a time trial attack course lap, or a time attack course lap, in the fact that we're looking at laps here within the region. Our fastest laps in qualifying should be high 56s. We're looking at 56.8s, 56.9s, but the majority of our drivers should be in the 57s. It consists of what would be argued to be 14 corners, but we're abridging it to 9 corners because turn 1 is technically treated as 2 corners. So right on board with Ben MK then, we start the lap short straight, running up to turn number 1. We're going to be coming down to second gear by apex on turn 1. You can see Ben's gone a bit deep because of the dirty air of Gomez's car. He's then going to power out the corner, going a little bit wide, but you can use the runoff there. 2 and 3 are flat out, running up to the hairpin at 4 here. You're going to brake as you're coming off apex of 3 into 4, and here it's all about a wide into tight apex because you want to use that downshift to second gear to rotate the car. Now you've got turn 5, which is a lift off the throttle. You don't want to downshift here or brake heavily for 5, and then you come through 6 and 7, 2 left-handers back to back, where it's all about confidence and throttle management. Now coming up to turn number 8, which is the final hairpin corner, and this is another second gear corner, and I would argue the lowest apex speed corner of the lot, but it leads on to the most important straight on the circuit, which is the long run up towards turn 9. It's not that long, but it's the longest straight on the circuit. Turn 9 being an extended right-hander, where you've essentially got to balance the throttle, downshift to third as Ben MK is demonstrating here, and then get on the power at the right time and use an upshift to fourth to push the car through. Ben going a little wide there out onto the gravel, but what you can see is because of the all-wheel drive nature of the Subaru that he's driving, as a result he was able to collect that very easily. The car was very stable upon correction and he was able to get away with it. And that is essentially the lap in a nutshell. And why Suba is such an interesting one for these cars is because it will be all about how well our drivers can get the cars turned in. Everybody going for the Subaru means that we're not going to be expecting certain cars to work to an advantage because everybody is in equal machinery here. We've got no ballast being applied to anybody's car. However, if you turn it around, what you can also think is if drivers can find themselves ahead of faster drivers due to pit stops or alternative in race number 3, or just one of the faster drivers, such as Yannick or Olaf, have a disastrous qualifying session, it is going to be a challenge to overtake here. Now, in terms of overtaking locations, as we're watching Olaf and Ben follow one another around, and we jump over to Olaf's car here, one of the things in terms of overtaking is you've got to feel as though you've got a pace advantage, and also that the driver you're battling with knows you're coming. Overtaking opportunities include turn 1, which we've been through, turn number 4 here, although turn number 4 you've got to really be side by side going through 3 into 4, and then you've got turn number 8, so that is coming up as the final hairpin. You can't really overtake through 5, 6 or 7. It'd be very, very risky to overtake into 5, as I know from the FIA Manufacturers Group 3 race. That was at the end of last year. But now coming into 8, this will be a prime overtaking spot, and this is what turn 8 is typically where you see a lot of overtaking manoeuvres, or in the run up to turn 9, but you need to settle into an order by the time you get into entry of turn 9, because what you find is the driver on the inside essentially becomes a rolling roadblock through turn 9 if you're going side by side into the corner. And with these cars having a nature to understeer, whoever finds himself on the outside going into turn 9, that is going to be one of the most difficult corners to make if you're trying to hold on to the outside. So that is the lap in a nutshell. And with that considered then, we're just waiting now. We've got a couple more minutes to go before we get qualifying underway, and that's a prime time if you haven't already got some form of liquid refreshment available to you, whether it's a cup of water or a cup of vodka. Preferably I'm going to go with the water here, just simply because I don't want to be drunk by the end of this one, although you can probably play some drinking games with certain phrases that I use time and time again, probably for the first time and last time of asking. Be sure to get yourself some drink and also a snack or two and get ready for some qualifying action any minute now, probably within the next minute or so. And then, of course, get ready for race action after that. Now, from what I've been able to gather from the practice sessions, our target pole lap will be a 56.8 from what I'm hearing, and the reason why the Subaru was picked is because it has that all-round balance of handling but also straight line performance. Another car which a number of drivers were looking at driving around here in EU Division 1 was the Mitsubishi Lancer, but there's one unfortunate problem with the Mitsubishi Lancer, if I remember correctly, and that is the Mitsubishi has a 5-speed gearbox, which cripples its performance at Suba compared to the Subaru. The Subaru is a very similar car to the Mitsubishi. The two are nearly identical in terms of how they perform in GT Sport as the balanced performance currently stands. The only problem is that effectively the Subaru has the better acceleration because of the 6-speed gearbox. Whereas if you look at the 5-speed gearbox of the Mitsubishi, that just holds it back because you're essentially having to get each gear to do more acceleration work, whereas you can be more punchy through the gears in the Subaru. Now, the GTR was one car that was being considered by a number of drivers, but the problem with the GTR is that it has one of the worst starting procedures of the cars within the all-wheel drive grouping of Group 4. Otherwise, it can be a strong car, and it does have that wonderful straight line speed and straight line acceleration beyond the low gears. But that's where things get held up. And that's why a number of drivers decided not to go for the GTR. As we see D here going for a practice start, and he should be able to literally just plant the throttle and go. He shouldn't need any traction control, and there's no traction control deployed there. And indeed, D has shown us just how easy it is to start while the Subaru's here. So we're really counting down now, and I'm hoping that at any point we are going to be seeing our qualifying session get underway, unless qualifying is underway and I just haven't noticed it. But I haven't had any announcements to say that qualifying is getting underway, so I'm assuming any moment now we are going to get a lobby reset, and that will get us started. As Pies is currently sat in the pit, so I think Pies will be going for the lobby reset any moment soon. As we see Chronic Opel doing some donuts coming out of what is turn number 5 and into 6. He's doing them off the circuit, keeping in mind that where Chronic is sat currently is where you've got this little mini chicane for one of, I think it's one of the time attack courses, and I think it's also one of the karting style courses where you can add some additional corners in on the circuit. And we are starting soon, so we will be getting qualifying underway any moment soon, folks, and we're bringing it right at you. That is correct. I believe a target pole today is, and we're doing our final start check, and then we'll be getting qualifying underway. I think our target pole for today will be a 56.8. It could even be lower if our drivers are able to burn a lot of fuel. And one of the things our drivers will have to keep in mind here is that they are expected not to use one other slipstream, but with the lap being so short and there being 14 cars out on circuit, it's likely you're going to trip up behind somebody and you might be able to get a little bit of a tow in the run from 8 up to 9. And if you can do that, well, that's going to hold you in good stead. As this time, we're going to ride on board right at the back of the field with Ian Trabuc and see how things go for Ian. You can see Ben MK rolling backwards a little bit there, and Ian having to take an emergency action there in order to avoid Ben's car being held up because it jumps the full start check. All of our drivers now running up into turn number 1, and this is really the final practice start they are going to get before we do get proceedings underway. And you can see all of them now keeping it a lot tamer into turn 1 compared to what you saw on the opening 3 start checks. Everybody being a lot cooler and a lot more calm in terms of approaching things. The one thing our drivers will of course have to watch out for, as we've quit out and now everybody's going to quit out so qualifying can get underway. The one thing people are going to have to watch out for is the fact a lot of drivers will go for opportunistic moves into 1 and 4 in the opening lap, because they will know that if they cannot get the move done, they may find themselves behind a drive for multiple laps. And with each of the opening 2 races being 10 laps long, that sounds a lot of laps. It's really not when you think about it. As qualifying now getting us underway. So everybody's going to be charging out, and it looks as though the first driver who's going to be leading the pack around for the opening qualifying laps then will be the Australian of Chronic Opel. Now, Krynik, of course, being one of those drivers who we know has got a huge amount of pace at his fingertips, he just simply needs to be able to deploy it to the best of his ability and also have fortune on his side. Lady luck always plays a part, no matter how good or bad a driver you are. All of our drivers here, of course, being very strong competitors. That's why they're in EU Division 1. Coming out into turn 8 then, what you're going to see is that given the fact that we have tyre wear set to ×2 for the purposes of this race, and we do have fuel depletion on, which is, I believe, ×3. Just go check and make sure. Fuel depletion being on ×3. We would expect here that our drivers are not going to be shielding their tyres for the opening qualifying lap. If anything, they're going to be more and more aggressive because they will want to get those tyres warmed up as much as possible. Everybody required to use the racing mediums, as always in GTSRL. So we ride on board with Krynik Opel as he does his opening qualifying lap. So second gear for turn number 1, and you can see that he took a late apex in order to get a very nice exit off of the corner. Now he's going to have a good run up into 4 here. Is he able to nail the braking point for 4? Going a bit deep, a bit too deep, and running out onto the marbles there before flicking the car back in. So that has cost him a sizable bit of time, has Krynik Opel. That has cost him about 2 to 3 tenths as a minimum, as he goes a little wide out of 5, but he uses the full width of the circuit from 6 into 7. Braking hard now for turn number 8, and second gear really planting on the apex. So that was a very nice turn 8. That's probably a very strong turn 8 compared to what can be done. And now he's got the final corner coming up in the form of turn number 9. Now he's going to have to nail this in terms of the downshift into third. If he downshifts here and he downshifts to third, takes a very wide opener and upshift into fourth immediately, that's going to rotate the car in, and that is going to be an opening lap, which is for Krynik Opel a 57.6. Not bad, but Yaya already going faster with what is a 57.4. So our time's already coming in at a reasonable pace, but you can see that everybody is quite close, with Luco now jumping, well, Olaf Biscuit immediately jumping up into the 56.8. That is already a 56.8 on the opening qualifying lap. So that's without too much fuel being burnt. Olaf already setting the pace by almost half a second. Well, I say that, and now Yannick's come through, the Swiss driver, setting a 56.9 and very close to Olaf's provisional pole time. So that is a round of laps already for most of our drivers. D coming across with a 57.0 with no air, we should point out, in terms of not getting a toe off anyone. So D doing that on completely clear air, and that was a very impressive lap from D. So that's one qualifying lap already done, and already you can see from pole, or provisional pole, all the way down to last at the moment, it's a gap of 1.1 second, well, almost 1.2 seconds, with Ian being the last of our running drivers at the moment in terms of qualifying times, as they're all coming around to complete their second qualifying lap. And at this point, I get the feeling that Olaf's already coming to the pit, so Olaf going for a fresh set of rubber. But we're just going to stay with Ian a little bit longer there and see how his lap compares. He's got traction control on here, which is going to help him in terms of a little bit of tyre wear, but it may be holding him back in the acceleration zones because of the fact that it interrupts the acceleration on each upshift by a small margin, by a small amount of time. D coming into the pits as well, and of course, all of our drivers can come into the pits whenever they want. They'll want to come into the pits at the end of a lap, rather than resetting to the pits, because otherwise that will reset the fuel in the car. Feel the vibes getting out of the way of Yannick at this point. We can see Olaf doing the same for Vitor Knight coming through. Speaking of Vitor, I believe Vitor is currently on lap with the coral liveried Subaru here. And coming through turn number 4, then he really cut onto the apex there. He's been able to get away with that. He has not picked up a track limits penalty. You can abuse the apex at turn 4 quite a bit, although not too liberally, but Vitor got away with it nicely. And you can see, however, he is not having a good lap, and he's got it all sorts of wrong, under braking into 8, putting the rear left wheel onto the dirt, and that's gone very wrong for the Portuguese driver. And, well, his teammate is now going to come through, and, of course, he's got to get out of the way of his teammate, who has just gone on to a warm-up lap, and he's going to be coming around now after going in for a fresh set of tyres to see what he can achieve. And he's holding a little bit of the brake in there and a little bit of throttle just to hit the limiter and burn some fuel, and that means he's going to have a little bit less fuel in the car as he goes on to his second flying lap. And let's ride on board with Olaf and get a feel for what he's doing. So coming into turn 1 then, he's staying in third gear, downshifted to second very early and taking a bit of wide apex there. Now I'm not sure if that was intentional, but he's got a very nice exit line off of it, but you wonder if he's got a little bit more in the tank. He's going faster than his first sector 1 that he set, so this is an improving lap from Olaf here as he comes out of turn 4 using the full exit width there. Now coming up into 5, using a little bit of the dirt to rotate the car in on the left-hand side, which you can do because it has a little bit less grip. It's like a curb effect, either dirt there. 6 and 7, he is 300ths up on his previous best, and now coming up through 8, this is where it all matters. He's got to get on the power as soon as possible, delaying that upshift into third as late as possible to get as much acceleration in second gear, and a using the potency of the Subaru's turbo there on the 6-speed engine, and now 6-speed gearbox, and now coming into the final corner here, staying in 4th gear, interestingly enough, for the entirety of turn number 9, and this is going to be an improvement by 600ths to a 56.835. So Olaf raising the bar just that little bit more. As we can see, his main competitor for pole at the moment, Yannick 2000, is a 10th down on his previous best, and D right now coming through on a 57.0. So D has improved a little bit, but not able to get into those 56s. So only 2 drivers finding their way into the 56s. But D has got quite a bit of comfort as he's not improving on this lap. He's got quite a bit of a comfort zone over his main competitor for the second row of the grid, and that is Phil the Vibes at this moment, who is 3 tenths down and is at risk of being usurped by Gomez if Gomez can nail his lap. So we do seem to have a bit of a split forming in terms of the field at the moment. Our top 3 drivers are all within 2 tenths of one another, but then we've got a gap to the rest of the field, with half the qualifying session still remaining as Vibes comes into the pits. And we now hop to Gomez, who's trying to find his way provisionally up onto the second row of the grid, as Olaf also pits after improving. But really, right now, it's anyone's guess who's going to be in that top 5. I think it's going to be a limited pool of competitors for who's going to be on that front row of the grid. But anybody could really be in that top 5 and really be on the 3rd row right now. And we can see that Luco is doing his utmost. So that 57.4 being set on his opening qualifying lap, and he hasn't really improved since there. So I think Luco right now is hitting a little bit of a barrier, which he's got to try and punch through. And I think Luco may just need to settle himself down, because I think he's got a lot of pace here, but the problem is that he's just not finding that rhythm, and he's found a little bit of rhythm. He's improved by 200ths of a second to a 57.4, almost flat now, rather than the 4.28 on his opening qualifying lap, and he's been jumped quite a bit, as we can see that Chronic Oval is now up into provisional P4 with a 57.3, so the Australian now going at it and going to get it, as Yaya is also now up into provisional P5 with a 57.3. That's not too far for Chronic, as we see that Yaya is not currently improving, and Chronic being on another qualifying lap, and penalties will be burned on the straight. So if anybody picks up a time penalty for track limit, alternatively a contact penalty, although contact penalties are off, but latency can cause the occasional weird contact penalty, they will be burned on either straight here as far as I recall. So coming through then, Chronic Oval to complete another qualifying lap. Will this be an improvement? I don't think it's going to be. He's gone quite a bit behind on time, and that is 6 tenths down on his previous best qualifying lap, that 57.3. So having a further look around the field here, nobody really improving, although Gomez is on a personal best right now. So we're going to wait, and we're going to follow the blue Subaru driver here from Portugal to see whether he does improve. And you can see he's got the traction control on there, staying in 4th gear for that final corner. So I think a number, and he's gone into all, but he did improve in the process of going into the wall. Literally crossed the line and then pounded the wall with the front end of that Subaru to a 57.3. So Gomez literally throwing everything at it, including his front bumper, in order to get as much lap time as possible. And I think somebody may be raising a little bit of an eyebrow in the steward's box right now, wondering, hey, are we really going to permit that in terms of running that wide out the final corner? But you can see that D has just jumped up into provisional P2 of a 56.9, so only 600ths ahead of Yannick, and still a whole 10th off of Olaf. So I think Olaf right now will be able to just turn the wick down a little bit and take a bit of pressure off himself, because I think he's done enough to get himself onto definitely the front row in qualifying, but even for that pole position. But D and Yannick bouncing back off of one another in terms of laps and doing their utmost. And Jugi08 has just joined the chat, so we say hello to Jugi, as D is continuing around and not improving right now. And we're just having a further look around, and we can see that Yaya is just coming out the pits to do a warm-up lap with only 3 minutes of qualifying to go. So our drivers are going to get a lot of chances in this qualifying session compared to what they had at Interlagos a week ago. And it's still anyone's guess. So all our drivers are now coming down to about 3/4 of a fuel tank. Olaf sitting on that 72% or 72 litres of fuel compared to the opening 100. And we'll be waiting to see who can move further up the grid by the end of the qualifying session. But right now, I think it really is going to be a three-way fight between D, Yannick and Olaf for that pole position, although it is looking as though it's in Olaf's favour. And then it's going to be between Chronic and Yaya and Gomez as well. Don't count them out. And I think Vibes is quite close. So he's very close from P4 all the way down to what is effectively, well, all the way down to, goodness me, P13 in terms of the battle for P4 right now. It's give you an idea, the gap between P13 and P4 is only approximately 4.5 tenths. It's not much, and that time can be found here if you get it right on a lap. But meanwhile, we're just going to follow Yannick around now as he goes on a campaign to improve, and we ride on board with the Swiss driver. Coming out to turn number 1 then, a little bit slow on initial exit, but seemed to stabilise it on the exit curve. Now coming out of 3, he's going to be hard braking in. You can see he's pointing the nose of the car right into the apex there, which means he's going to have to try and catch the car, and he caught it nicely on the brakes as he now comes through 5 and trying to stay on that throttle, but having to lift a little bit as the car just didn't want to go with him. And he'll come through 6 and 7. He's 2 tenths down already. I think this is going to be a lap which is not going to see Yannick improve. Now, what can our drivers do to try and work around that nature of the car not wanting to turn into particularly turn 5? Well, they could move the brake bias towards the rear of the car. That will open up the rear end. That'll be more typically under braking into a corner, but that will help with some of that rear-ended nature of the car, where at the moment the car wants to understeer a lot under braking or turn in, as Yannick comes around to complete his lap, and it is definitely not an improvement. So Yannick right now 1.6 tenths down off of Olaf. As ZenQ has just jumped all the way up into P5 with 57.2. So remember, ZenQ only about 2 minutes ago was a provisional P13. He now finds himself in provisional P5, and Luco has also moved up into provisional P4 with a 57.0. So now 2 tenths ahead of ZenQ. Luco being on the ball here to snatch a place on that second row of the grid. I think Yannick is going to be safe unless Luco is going to pull something out of the bag. But the thing about Luco right now that you've got to consider is that if he can get himself into P3, that is going to put a bit of pressure on Yannick. He doesn't do enough there, but again, he's now on a follow-up qualifying lap, and the rawness of the tyres goes off, and that freshness of grip goes off after one hot qualifying lap by looks of things. But with well, I believe that is qualifying coming to its end, as ZenQ will be one of our first drivers to come to the end of the qualifying session, as is Yaya, who's currently sitting P7, and our drivers all come through. Yannick does not improve, so P3 is going to be the best that Yannick can do here, as we see some more drivers coming through in the form of Vitor not improving on P11, or Feel the Vibes improving on P9, and then we've got Pies who's P13. So Pies is going to be P13, and he'll quit out the lobby most likely in a little bit to record the qualifying times. And then we've got Ian coming through, who's going to be starting at the back of the field with that 58.0. Ian not finding too much pace today. D does not improve too much more. He does improve to a 56.8, but not enough to contest Olaf, who sits at 56.7. My goodness, Olaf has just dominated qualifying. And we've got Stanley and Luco coming through, neither of them improving. And I believe that is everybody complete for qualifying. So your pole sitter, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be one Olaf from the United Kingdom with a 56.7. That is a phenomenal pole lap. Alongside him will be D from the Netherlands, who in the end was 1.3 tenths off and 0.13 seconds off. And then we have got, starting off the second row, Yannick from Switzerland, and alongside him will be Luco in that close contest for the second row of the grid. It'll be ZenQ that starts off row 3 from Poland, alongside in the Australian of Chronic Opel, who's doing some more donuts. Then starting off the fourth row will be the Brit of Yaya, alongside him Gomez from Portugal. And then it will be the fifth row of Feel the Vibes and Stanley, the Brit and the Danish driver, not Danish driver, sorry, the Dutch driver, getting my nationalities mixed up here, having met one another before out on circuit, and will do so again tonight. And then the sixth row of the grid will be started by the Portuguese of Vitor Knight, and alongside him will be Ben MK. And then it will be Pies 1123, who starts off the seventh row of the grid, and alongside him to complete our field will be the Dutch driver of Ian. Ian having the worst of the qualifying sessions, but you never know what he could get up to in the race trim. So we're going to wait and find out what is going to happen in race number 1, of course, but really start to place your bets right now in terms of who is going to be pulling off that race win. Now, I'm going to take a quick sip and then give you my thoughts on what could happen in race number 1. So thinking about it, Olaf seems to have a little bit of a pace advantage. Now, keep in mind we are running real slipstream here, so our slipstream zone is 0.75 seconds between cars. That means that whilst Olaf may have, say, a tenth an advantage, if D or Yannick can just sit behind him, they can use the slipstream to offset that. Now, what also has to be thrown in here is, imagine Olaf's time right now at 56.7, and let's go down to P10, for example. It's 6 tenths between P1 and P10 after qualifying. What this indicates is that the pace advantage that Olaf has may be usurped if one of these drivers is able to send a move, alternatively there's an incident on the opening lap, which can happen into turn 1, particularly in race number 1, where some drivers may be feeling a little bit overconfident, a little bit overzealous on their overtaking manoeuvres, and that can upset the car, and that can cause things to open up. But one thing we did note at Interlagos last week is that when Yannick, so our P3 driver, is given the opportunity to run behind a faster driver, he knows how to use that driver's air, particularly the slipstream zone, to chase after them and keep the pressure on. Now, Olaf was setting a bit of pace in relation to Yannick, but what you can imagine is that if Yannick can stay behind Olaf and stay close to him, he may go for an adventurous move in order to try and upset the car. Race 1, I think a number of our drivers further down the field will do their utmost to try and get higher up the field, whereas some of our drivers towards the front will try and keep it cool and size one another up. But I don't think Olaf's going to have everything his way tonight. So we're just getting the change of time today, so we've now moved to midday, and we're switching the weather to fine weather, so we've got some very nice weather coming over now, not too much clouds. And we're just really waiting out for race number 1 to come underway. But in the meantime then, whilst we're counting down, I think we've got a couple of drivers who are just going for a very quick comfort break before we do get the racing underway. This is their last opportunity too, until the momentum really swings. And we just say hello to a couple more individuals in the stream chat, including Name of a Moon. And to those of you who've tuned in recently, hope you're doing well and you've had a good start to your week, with it being Monday evening. And of course, you've had a good weekend. Now, one thing that is worth noting is in terms of Slipstream is not going to give you a pass around here because we haven't got that many long straights. It's only really the run from 8 to 9 where you could expect Slipstream to give you an advantage to actually enable you to pull off a move. So really, it is going to be about getting used to running close behind another driver. And that's what I think a number of our drivers would have been practicing in the lead up to today's racing. Is the idea of just getting a feel for, okay, if I'm running in the dirty air of another car, how can I maintain my pace relative to that car? Because the thing is about Group 4 cars, these are all technically road cars, just with a rear wing added to them, and also a tiny little bit of tuning. Otherwise, these are road cars, and what that means is we haven't got a huge amount of aerodynamics. These cars are not reliant on their aero in order to get around the circuit to the utmost pace. As we're about to get underway with race number 1. So we're just waiting now. I think 1 or 2 more drivers just need to ready up. Otherwise, we are going to be getting race number 1 underway very shortly. And yep, we are good to go. So race number 1 is coming at you, folks. And we'll see who emerges victorious at the end of the opening 10 laps. So it'll be on the right-hand side, Olaf, on the left-hand side, D, but behind them, Yannick and Luco. But keep an eye out for ZenQ Meister, who may be looking to take opportunities where they arise, as race number 1 is about to get underway. And it's lights out and away they go. Everybody getting a relatively similar start here, although you can see that Yannick immediately pulling over to the right side to go defensive, and Luco looking for a potential move around the outside into turn 1, and he's going to try and hold it around the outside as they go through that, and Luco able to get the power down, but I think Yannick pulls back in front here as all of our drivers have made it through turn 1 safely. But now the big question appears, how do they all get into turn number 4? As you can see, Luco being caught on the inside there, and he's pushed ZenQ a little bit wide and found himself going wide, and that means the Australian Chronic Opal is now up into P4, but Luco deciding to go for the move there, but backing out at the last moment into turn 5, knowing that you can't go too wide there. And Chronic Opal has had a phenomenal start, finding himself all the way up into full places. There's huge contact, and Yaya knocks both Luco and ZQ Meister wide, going a bit deep on the brakes by the looks of things. And as they're all coming down in the run into turn number 9, it's Pies drag racing against ZenQ, but ZenQ getting ahead, and meanwhile Ben MK finds himself moving up into P6 with all the kerfuffle that's happening around him. And after one lap it is Olaf ahead of D, then Yannick, then Chronic Opal, then Yaya ahead of Ben. Feel the vibes behind, then it's Luco and ZenQ going for a move into turn 1 on Luco here, and literally sending it like no man's business, and he's got it done, and that puts him up into P8. Pies behind the pair of them, and it's Stanley in P11, Vito Knight in P12, Ian in 13th, and the driver who's lost out the most on the opening lap is Gomez, all the way down in 14th now, and trying to find his way back into the fight. As we see, there's been a major incident by looks of things. Well, they're going 3 wide into turn 5. What on earth was that? We're going to take a look back at that in a second. As you can see, the fighting is not done. Luca and Feel the Vibes getting very argy-bargy here, which has got to be expected. We're in the touring car class, and ZenQ also making a move on Ben MK there. You saw it turn 8 at the front of your camera shot as they all charge down towards turn number 9 for the second time of asking. And well, Feel the Vibes is dropping down the order here, and Vito Knight is feeling cheeky, and he's going to go for it into the final corner. And is he going to hold on to it? And I think he's got it done. Vito has got up into P10. As we can see, they're all coming across the line to begin lap number 3. And Vito Knight has had to back out of it. And Feel the Vibes is now back up into P10. But Vito now getting caught out. Ian going for a very adventurous move late on the brakes into turn 1. And it's knocked him wide by simply understeering off the corner. But as they all come out into turn number 4 then, is it going to settle down into an order? We're going to expect some more adventures as Ian goes for a lunge up into P12. And Gomez tries to follow through and knock his fellow countryman out the way and almost completely loses it, but he just about catches it, and it means that Vito is now up into P13 just for now, but he's holding off Gomez as much as he can. These two battling one another non-stop as Gomez is all over the road, struggling with that car by looks of things. As you can see further up, Stanley now trying to get the move on the Brit of Feel the Vibes, but we must look a little bit further up the field as we can see that D has dropped down to P3 and Yannick has found his way past, and D now up into P3 means he's got Chronic Oval all over the back of him. The Australian, having had that phenomenal opener, is now trying to make his way further up the field. But before we have a look at that, we're going to jump back and see what happened on lap number 2. When we had that 3 wide moment going through turn number 4 and up into 5. So it looks as though here, well, it all kicked off in the fact that Feel the Vibes got it all sorts of wrong coming out of turn number 5. And then further back we can see, oh right, so Ben MK and also Feel the Vibes tripped over one another, and ZenQ tried to capitalise on the disadvantage that was conferred to the pair of them by tripping over one another coming out of turn number 4, and ZenQ was the man on a mission there, as we can see that Olaf has broken the slipstream toe, and Yannick now finds himself having to fend off a fast charging D and Chronic Opal behind him, but Olaf doing everything he needs to right now to hold on to that race lead. As we can see, it's now opening up the battle for P2 between 3 drivers, but everybody seems to be settling down now, what if half the race distance almost covered. As we come on to lap number 5, Ben MK finds himself in a bit of a lonely 7th place after all the argy-bargy, but behind him, meanwhile, it is Luco, who has seen his race fortunes go from good to bad, but will they go to worse? Well, we'll have to find out, as we can see that he's having to defend against Feel the Vibes right now, and you can defend quite comfortably at turn 1, but of course, if you get a bad exit out of 1, then that means the driver behind will feel encouraged to go for an absolute lunge, and he's gone for the send, Vibes has, and he's gone deep, and you can see that Luco's gone for the cutback, and goodness me, I almost choked over my own words there. As you can see that Vibes, well, I think Vibes has got back in front, but it's all kicking off between these two, and we're going to just see whether Stan Lee's able to capitalise, and Stan Lee finds himself 3 wide into turn number 8. And Stan Lee going around the outside with a bit of a Moses manoeuvre as well. And it's going to be a 4-way drag race come up into turn 9 for the 5th time of asking. As you can see, Pies is getting in the mix as well. And also, well, Feel the Vibes is losing every single position. And meanwhile, Luco is doing everything he can. This is a masterclass of defensive driving from Luco, knowing when to cut back. And Stan Lee going very wide out of turn 9 as they now come into turn 1 on lap number 6. There's still 3 wide. And they're showing each other so much respect right now, but in return I think they're going to have to calm it down, as Pies is now up into P10 and no, Feel the Vibes is up into P9, so he's got those 2 places back. And meanwhile up front, I can report, folks, that Yannick is still feeling a lot of pressure from D. It is a very, very close between these two right now, but Yannick is holding on as D is getting closer and closer and sniffing the exhaust fumes of the Swiss there. And behind that battle for P2, the battle for P5 is intensifying with ZenQ getting closer and closer to the back of Yaya, albeit he's not able to put a move on right now. But let's go back and just take a look at what happened with Luco, Vibes and company. So, Luco right now, as we ride on board, you're going to see on his left-hand side, Vibes is just going to come through like a bullet. And in return, Luco goes, well, Vibes, if you're not going to bother making the corner, then I'll just simply take the corner naturally. Vibes tried to turn in and get on the power, but it didn't work out. Of course, he then went deep into 5, and Luco was sort of, well, Vibes, if you're going to make a habit of giving me the cutback space, then I'll go for it. And then it all opened up, of course, because he was on the inside, Vibes was on the outside, and well, then you had Stan Lee trying to send it around the outside, and it was Luco who got away with it all in the end and was able to hold the speed out the corner as he got argy-bargied into the straight, and he emerged victorious in the end as Pies had to back out of it because he didn't have room. He would have run on the grass. But up front, you can see that Yannick is still being pressed hard by D, and Olaf being 1.3 seconds ahead of the pair of them right now is just pulling a little bit away at this time, as meanwhile ZenQ I think has got ahead of Yaya. Let's see if we can catch what happened. Well, it must have happened into turn 1 or turn 4 because it's already happened based on our replay there on lap number 7. Apologies for missing that, folks, but yes, ZenQ is now up into P5 ahead of Yaya, who is falling back into the clutches of Ben MK here. So Ben is trying to get the move on for P6, but I think if it's going to happen, he's got to get a lot closer, or it's going to be the mother of all sends on one of the later laps, as we can see that Yannick is being so heavily pressured right now by D. As we jump on board with the Swiss driver here and we look back from what is P2 at the moment, his last lap being that 57.4, which isn't too bad a lap. It's not far off of our race leader, and D has set the fastest lap of a 57.1. So the Dutchman of D is on a mission to try and claim that P2 by the end of the race. And you can see how D is trying to take different lines because of the dirty air, and he wants to try and get the cutback on Yannick. He's trying to get Yannick to go too deep into a corner so that way he can get the acceleration out and beat Yannick in the drag race to the next corner, either the heavy braking zone. But as well, D's not trying to put too much pressure on all the time, but he's keeping a constant level of pressure there, because with 2 laps to go now, with these 2 laps, it's all going to be about when does he go for the move, and he'll be studying Yannick like a hawk right now, looking for where Yannick is weak. As you can see, D gets a much deeper entry into turn 1, but in return it means he gets on the throttle sooner and gets the turn in for the exit of turn 1 much earlier than Yannick. He's not going for the move yet, but Yannick is definitely succumbing to the pressure of D by the looks of things. He's keeping a level head, mind you, the Swiss, but you can just see that D is that bit faster as ZenQ is feeling pressure from Yaya right now in the battle for P6, or the battle for P5 I should say, and behind them Luco is now our driver in P7, as I believe somebody has dropped all the way back, and Ben MK has dropped miles back, and behind them it's all kicking off. Stanley and Ian both on the safe section of the circuit. Stanley having dropped quite a bit back, and he's going to go defensive against Ian here. Now will Ian go for the send on the inside into 8? He's going to go for it, Ian, as we can see that Pies and Ben are battling, and a similar thing has happened between the pair of them. And as they're coming up into the drag strip now, which is the run down towards turn number 9, it's going to be Pies on the inside, but he's got to concede to Ben. And meanwhile up front, Yannick is going immediately defensive into turn number 1. And I think he knows now that this is where it all comes down. He knows D's going to send it. He's been studying Yannick for so long. He could write a book on Yannick's driving style, I reckon. But D, it wants to get that move done as soon as possible now, or literally get as close as possible to send it into turn 8. He's running out of opportunities here, albeit Chronic Opal is not close enough to capitalise potentially should he find that the 2 drivers take one other out. Now will they potentially go for a move, or will D go for a move I should say into turn 8? No, he's going to go very deep, but he's trailing it in, and you can see he's going for that cutback, but I don't think it's going to be enough. If it is, he's going to have to just place it on the inside, but Yannick already going defensive here. Now, unless he's going to find a way around the outside, which I don't think he is, I think D has missed the opportunity here. But as they come out the final corner, then your race winner on race number 1 after 10 laps is Olaf from the United Kingdom, ahead of Yannick, who's just going to pip D to the line, and it's Chronic Opal in P4. ZenQ's going to hold on to P5, just about from Yaya, and then behind them it's going to be Luco ahead of Feel the Vibes, and it'll be Ben MK and Pies rounding off your top 10. And then in P11 it will be Stanley ahead of Ian in the end, and it will be Gomez leading ahead of Vitor Knight to complete race number 1. So your race winner, ladies and gentlemen, Olaf from the United Kingdom. Well, that was a fantastic race. So much so, we just need to look at those standings again. So, confirmation subject to any shoulds inquiries, of course. Your race winner after 10 laps in race 1, Olaf ahead of Yannick and D rounding off our podium. And our top 5 being completed by the Australian of Chronicova and ZenQ and P5. The fastest lap in race 1 being on lap number 4 as set by D31 at 57.132. And we're just going to take a moment to take a quick breather and a drink. Well, that was a phenomenal drive by Olaf to hold off the pressure from the drivers behind and eventually pull that break in terms of the slipstream zone. But a couple of things we can observe from race number 1 then. As we expected, a lot of moves were attempted on lap number 1. Turn 1 being the customary send it in, but also in turn number 4. We saw a lot of moves in turn number 4, and we saw how drivers who assessed what was going to happen on the opening couple of corners were able to take advantage of that, and Chronicova was probably the greatest beneficiary on the opening lap in the fact that he just simply placed the car well so he could make the move into turn number 4. But the return, of course, was as the race went on and the driving field starts to spread out. It becomes more of a case of studying where your opponent is stronger and weaker than you, and then looking for the opportunity, and really you've got to send the move, and the guy around you's got to be aware of it. I think there may be some questions being asked between Feel the Vibes and some of the other drivers because of what happened midway through the race, particularly out of turns 4, 5 and 6, but it seems to be all relatively clean, just got a little bit scatterbrained. But of course that's going to happen at this circuit. This is a very tight circuit. These cars are chunky. The Subaru WRX is not a slim car, it's worth noting. It's not as big as a Nissan GTR, but it's a pretty chunky car, so we're expecting contact. It's rubbing is racing, and everybody kept it as clean as possible. And of course what that means is we are expecting that Olaf will be leading our field away on race number 2, and he'll be joined alongside by Yannick. Behind him will be D, of course. As we see Ben MK just riding around right now, and we're very grateful for the fact he's out on the circuit. Getting a little bit of circuit time in, a little bit of practice time, and of course ensuring that our cameras don't break when we come on to the next race. But for me, in terms of race number 1, what was my moment? I would say, and be sure to let me know in the chat section what your moment was in race number 1. For me, it's 3 wide into turn 8. Between what was Stan, Vibes, I think it was Vibes, and I can't remember the other drivers. We get the change of time of day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. To see them all go 3 wide and then subsequently 4 wide in the run down to turn 9. You don't see that at Suba. Well, at least you won't see that in an FIA race, because every time you can get within breathing distance of another car, you're probably going to get a contact penalty. And Ben being the gentleman once again and heading out into the circuit, although I think we've got a couple more cars heading out this time. It was a very clean cut race for Olaf. But as I say, it was worth noting how D started to be very smart in terms of what he was doing in the end. I think D recognised the fact that when he lost the position out to Yannick initially, he could have perhaps gone for a lunge somewhere. Obviously didn't see him on camera, but instead he waited behind Yannick and instead put more and more pressure on. And he'll have all that information as he goes into the next race. But in return, what it also meant is Olaf may have been pacing himself to the other drivers. He may have been doing that. But if they can keep in that rhythm and that fashion when they're not tripping over one another, then they could get closer and closer to Olaf. We're just waiting out. A couple of our drivers are on comfort breaks at the moment. As we just head with Stanley, he'll be looking to make up for lost ground in race number 1 in race 2. And you can see our drivers using trail braking through the final corner just to get the car to gradually turn him. And just waiting for a heads up from race control that race 2 is about to start. I think we're going to get it. Here we go. Race number 2 is going to be underway anyway, and that is the countdown, folks. So, the question will be, will it be another race led from start to finish by Olaf, or will we see a spanner in the works, or will we see it all kick off behind? So, as we look down towards the grid once again, on your right will be Olaf from the United Kingdom. On your left, it will be Yannick from Switzerland. Behind them, D and Chronic Opel. The Dutchman and the Australian both looking to make up ground. But watch out for ZenQ in P5 once again, who may be looking for a cheeky early move. And it's lights out and away they go. And all of our drivers once again getting a good start. None more so than Olaf actually getting a really strong start out of the opening acceleration sequence. And as they all come up into turn 1, you can see Yannick immediately getting defensive and Chronic trying to squeeze it around the outside of D initially. But Yaya is up into P5 now. As, oh goodness me, it's all kicked off at the back of the camera there. And we're going to take a look back at what happened in a wee while. But everybody's settling into a line of stern formation this time. Although ZenQ seems to have been caught up in a little bit of a nose to tail crunch there as he knocked into Yaya, but I think he received contact from others behind him, which is Ben MK at this point in time. Although behind Ben, we can see that Feel the Vibes here has managed to get past Ian going up into turn number 8, although Ian is trying to send it, and Ian has actually really jumped up through the field on the opening start sequence. Now up into P9, wasn't able to get the move done on what is Feel the Vibes, but ZenQ has dropped back, and now Ian in the drag race against ZenQ as they come into the final corner. ZenQ, I think, is going to have to back out of this because he won't have the momentum to carry around the outside. But after one lap, it is Olaf ahead of Yannick, and I think Yannick is all over the back of Olaf right now and really close to the back of the British driver. And then it's D following up behind, then Chronic Opel. They're 1 second gap to Ben, who is ahead of Yaya. Feel the Vibes in Tabuk. And then it is ZenQ in P9, who's still battling, this time with Pies in the battle for P9. And Pies is on the inside up into turn 4. And I think Pies is going to have this initially, but he will have to give ZenQ some space. As you can see, as they come now up into 5, ZenQ still finds himself there, and he's on the inside for 5, which means Pies has to back out of it. And behind them, it is the fast-charging Vitor Knight from Portugal, who is trying to get ever closer to the back of Pies. But Luco is down in P12, Stanley in P13, and Gomez down in P14. But what went wrong for Stanley, we will find out very shortly for you. We're just going to see if a potential move occurs going up into turn 1 for lap number 3, because Yannick is getting so much closer to Olaf with every increase in lap here. And I think Yannick may be looking for a move. What the gap between him and Olaf now only being less than 1.5 tenths as we look forward from his car. And he's not going for it yet, although he's almost got himself alongside the rear side panel of Olaf here. And Olaf just simply doing enough to stay ahead right now. But I don't think Yannick's going to settle for this for too long, because he knows how close he is. But then again, perhaps Yannick's thinking, you know what, I'm more likely to get second place if I don't fight Olaf and let him pull me away. But in return, it means that we're getting a bit of a train forming behind. And well, in talking about trains, we can see we're starting to get a free wide moment once again, with Ian now being the cork in the bottle for ZenQ and Pies, who are fighting tooth and nail to try and get past one another, and also be Ian up into P8. And you can see ZenQ trying to go for the Moses into turn 8 and not able to put it off, but he does end up blocking Pies as a result, as Pies has to back out of it. And now ZenQ tries to have a drag race with Ian down into turn 9, but he hasn't got the momentum, and Stanley now finds himself jumping up into P11 as Pies is down into P12. And let's see what happened to Stanley on that opening lap. So as they all pulled off then, we're just going to ride on board with Stan. So coming up into turn number 1 then, he immediately pulls to the inside. I think he's going defensive, but also going for a move. He sends Feel the Vibes forward. He gets knocked in the back himself, and at this point, as he tries to turn on, you can see that he gets contacted by Vitor Knight, and that's what sent him into the wall. But Vitor, to be fair, I think respected that and then lifted off a little bit later. Well, that seems to have been what happened, because Vitor is now behind as Stanley is up into P10 and battling with Pies, although Pies has got back in front. And I think now Pies has got that inside line into outside line, but Stanley will have the inside for 5. And Pies has gone very wide there. And, whoa, goodness me. Pies literally finding a way of siphoning between those two drivers. We're going to have a look back at that in a second. But Vitor now going for the move up into P10. And I think he's done it. I think Vitor's got ahead. As you can see, up front, meanwhile, in the battle for the race lead, Olaf still holding on. But look how Yannick is now starting to fall back a little bit. And D is now finding himself getting into the mix there. And meanwhile, in the battle for P5, it is Ben MK. What is then Q falling down quite a bit? It is Ben MK who now finds himself holding on to P5 and not really in contention for P4 right now, but doing his utmost to hold off the fast charging Yaya and feel the vibes. The three British drivers forming a little bit of a consortium and seemingly just follow each other line astern. As we can see behind it is ZenQ, who's got past Ian Tabuk finally on lap number 4, and now he's going to try and find his way up towards them. But while Stanley is trying to make his way up into P10 and Vitor has gone very deep, we're going to hop back and take a look at Pies' car, and that on board of what was probably the moment of the night so far. So you can see coming out of 4, Pies had to respect the fact that he had Stanley on his inside here, so he's going to go wide, but watch how he loses control of the car and just goes between both himself and Vitor Knight, and he literally just missed the pair of them. That is incredible from Pies. The fact that he was able to dodge that, and I think that man deserves a medal. But nonetheless, coming on to lap number 6, there you can see Yannick having a little bit of contact with Olaf there, and now I think the gloves are starting to come off here. I think Yannick realises, right, if I'm going to go for a move, I've got to do it soon. As we can see that Yaya has moved up into P5 ahead of Feel the Vibes and Ben MK. Ben has lost 2 positions to these guys as Yaya has drifted his way into turn 4, and these guys will be wanting to chase after our pack of 4, chasing after the leader, but of course they're 2.2 seconds down, and that is a lot of time to gain due to pace. They need the guys ahead of them to fight a lot. ZenQ is in a quiet space at the moment, finding himself almost a second ahead of Ian and 3 seconds down on the battle for P5. So I think ZenQ is just going to have a quiet one from this point onwards and a quiet P8 to himself. But Ian is chasing after as best he can as Stanley has found himself ahead of Luco, and Luco is trying to get ever closer to the back, and Pies is not out of this yet. But you can see as they come on to lap number 7, then it is still Olaf ahead of Yannick, and I think Olaf perhaps is also turning up the wick a little bit now as we ride on board with Chronic Opal. We're just riding back with our P4 driver at the moment, and you can see that his lap times have been consistently in the 57s. The last one being a 57.6, and he hasn't really been getting too much closer to the guys ahead of him. I think at this point, Chronic will be happy in this position as he's dropping out of the slipstream zone of the guys in front. He's now almost a second down on D, which means he will not be getting that pull on the straights, whereas D will be off the back of Yannick's car. But behind him, of course, he's got to do his utmost to make sure that Yaya does not bring the battle for P5 into a battle for P4, as Chronic is falling just a little bit more off the back of the battle for the race lead at the moment, and things are starting to slip away from him. But of course, I think he'll be happy with a P4. And, well, P8 right now, ZenQ just not really able to do much to get away from Ian. But behind them, you can see in the battle for P10, Stanley holding on for now. But Luco is really all over the back of the Dutch ride. I think Luco's going for an intimidation. He's not able to pull off a move to make Stanley make a mistake, and where Luco could gain the position. So the Welsh liveried Heineken-sponsored Subaru, whoa, I say that, and he's going for it. He's going to go around the outside into 1. He carried a lot of momentum up into 1 compared to Stan. And you can see he's going for the cutback is Luco, and Luco with the cutback there has got it done. Well done to Luco. That was phenomenal placement by that man, and Luco showing his credentials as he now moves on to the chase for the P9 going after Ian. But behind them, Pies hold on to that P12 right now in the zebra liveried, zebra liveried, depending on how you want to say it, Subaru, and behind them Vitor Knight, the 2 Portuguese drivers, just simply nip and tuck, but neither one of them gained on the other. As we're getting closer, we're coming into that final 5th of the race. You can see that right now Olaf is doing everything he needs to hold on to that race win. And behind it is Yaya, who's holding on to P5, but he's got Vibes and Ben MK, who are both mounting the pressure with 2 laps to go. And I think it could all kick off in these 2 battles any moment now, as we can see that Yaya is anticipating a move from Feel the Vibes, but he did go full defensive, and Vibes has gone for the move, and Ben MK has come through with him, and Ben MK is trying to carry all that momentum through to try and get a 2-for-1 special, but unfortunately that special offer is not available, as they're going to try and squeeze one another 3 wide through turn 4, and Ben MK finds himself going wide and can't get the cut back off, and now they're going to carry this sequence through into turn 5, but they've got to settle it down, because otherwise they're going to lead ZenQ onto the back of their Merry Mail trail. And meanwhile, Feel the Vibes just about squeezes ahead of Yaya, coming up into the braking zone for 8, and I think he's done everything he needs to, but Ben is trying to squeeze on the inside of Feel the Vibes, and that means he's got the position against Yaya, but he hasn't got enough here in order to get past Feel the Vibes. But as they come up into 8 then, who's it going to be at the head of the pack? It's Feel the Vibes, Yaya in the middle, and Ben MK at the rear of the group. And now on the final lap, we can see that Olaf is holding on to the lead for now, but will Yannick go for some sort of move as it's now the final lap? I'm not sure, ladies and gentlemen. We will find out. Meanwhile, in the battle for P5, we can see that they haven't changed places at turn 1. Is Yannick close enough to go for a move into turn 4? He's too far back, I'd say, as he's almost 4 tenths down. Olaf now turning it up just that tiny bit, it would seem, as Yaya almost goes into the back and Feel the Vibes. They're very close between these guys. And these are the two closest fights out on circuit, as we can see that there's a bit of space between all 3 drivers in the battle for lead, and Yannick trying to find some way of getting through or trying to make Olaf make a mistake, but he's not making one, as Yaya almost goes to the move there. I think he was 50-50 on the fence about going for it, but he didn't go for the move in the end. And behind we can see that it is Luco defending off Stan Lee, and in as they come around the final corner then, it is going to be 2 out of 2 for Olaf ahead of Yannick and D, and in P4 it will be Chronic Opal. Behind them, he's just done enough to bring home a P5 in Feel the Vibes. Yaya and Ben MK following suit. Then ZQ in P8, Ian coming home in P9, and Luca round off our top 10 as Stanley hits the wall on the final corner. We accidentally hit the chat button, and well, in P12 it was Pies, and then it was Vitor Knight and Gomez rounding off the field. And over to our race winner, Olaf from the United Kingdom once again. As we take a look at our final standings for that race, subject to any stewards' decisions, of course, we can see that the fastest lap this time was a 57.0 set by Yannick 2000 on lap 2. So Olaf did not have the fastest lap there, but he didn't need to in order to hold everybody off. So he did a very good job, Olaf. But this time we could see that whilst it was back-to-back wins for Olaf, there is definitely a contention for Yannick, D and Chronic Opal all to potentially have a chance of picking up that race win, or at least being on that podium. It is not going to be simple sailing, one would expect here, but we'll wait and find out. Of course, perhaps Olaf has just conserved his pace in this race and waiting for race number 3. And, well, in terms of our order there, it was Olaf, Yannick and D created our podium, and then Chronic Opal and Feel the Vibes rounding off our top 5. And we should point out that despite a disastrous start, we did see that Ben MK was able to get himself back up into P7 by the end of the proceedings, just ahead of Zen Q, who didn't have a good start either. And now we wait for race number 3, with some phenomenal racing there. And we're just going to take a very quick sip of water because unfortunately we're losing our voice. And whilst we've got a minute's break, if you need to go to the bathroom or grab a drink, now's the time to do so, ladies and gentlemen, because we've got 20 minutes of action coming up. And we do have a couple of drivers going for a quick comfort break, so you may have an additional minute. So it all comes down then to race number 3 in terms of who can pick up the topmost points. Who's going to walk away with that big 21 haul for the win? Will it be Olaf making it 3 back-to-back? And well, what's going to be important on the journey to picking up that win? Well, the key thing is going to be in the fact that we have a mandatory pit stop now, but when do you pit? Now, we saw in round number 1, the idea was for our race leaders is that they pitted as late as possible, because what they found was the times free tyre wear in that race was not a major factor in terms of lap time for them. They seemed to be happy to run the race to the end on a single set of tyres. However, with times 2 tyre wear here, as we change to the evening now, it's now 6 o'clock in the evening. Goodness me, global warming is also causing time skips as well as temperatures to rise. The thing to note here is the fact that really you need to find a way of pitting to come out and clear air. Because if you pit and come out behind another driver or a battling pair of drivers, you're going to see your race just thrown away. You're going to lose so much time because then you've got to find a way past or wait until they pit if they haven't pitted already. So I suspect that our race leaders are probably going to go as deep as possible over the course of this race. And when they come into the pits, they probably won't change tyres because they'll be coming in on a 21 lap race. They'll probably be coming in on, say, a lap, what would be somewhere around lap 17 to 20. And with tyre wear only being ×2 here, albeit these cars are heavy on their tyres typically, with a bit of tyre saving, it's very unlikely that they're going to see their tyres fall off the cliff completely. Now, for those who are wondering what does fall off the cliff mean, in terms of once the tyres get to a certain amount of wear, they just simply go, the lap times really fall apart and everything just starts to collapse in terms of race pace. I think the tyres are going to hold up here, so I think a lot of our drivers are probably not going to worry about changing tyres in the pits. Of course, those who do will have fresher tyres and therefore more grip, and they'll have slightly faster laps. But how much of an advantage that provides here, given the fact that really there's no major slipstream overtaking zones apart from the run up into turn 9, it'll be questionable. And track position is critical at Tsuba, and I think that's what our drivers will be looking for. Now, if I was in the midfield, I would potentially look at pitting early. If I was starting in, say, P9 or further back, I would look at, I've got nothing to lose, I'd look at pitting within the first 5 laps. Because what I know then is I'm likely to be in fresh air for at least 5 to 6 laps as I'm chasing the field and trying to catch up to the field, at which point everybody's going to need to start pitting, and that's where I'll try to gain. Of course, I might have to worry about the fact towards the end of the race my tyres might not be as fresh as the other tyres available if the other drivers do take on a new set of tyres. But with Tsuba being such a tight track and limited overtaking opportunities, you have to force an overtake here really. I can drive defensively for perhaps the last 6 laps of the race and pull off a strong result. So that'll be on the minds of our drivers. Of course, if you're starting, say, P4 round, well, not P4 perhaps, but say P5 around to P8, that's where it gets very complicated because you need to have a good opening couple of laps. You need to get clear and then you need to get yourself some space on track, because otherwise if you pit straight away, you'll find yourself probably coming out right at the back of the pack, but literally coming onto the back of, say, what would be P13, P12. That's going to make life difficult, so you can't afford that luxury of just pitting early. But that's something that our drivers will be weighing up right now, and they've probably practiced as well. Personally, I don't know what the pit time loss is for the pit stop around Tsuba. I'm getting the feeling if we're using the standard GT Sport template as it currently stands, it'll be around 8 seconds as a minimum. And we are underway with race number 3, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. We just had it confirmed to us. 20 laps. Well, sorry, not 20 laps, 21 laps. 20 minutes of action. And by the end of it, who will come out on top for the finale tonight? Will it be Olaf making it a triplet of race wins, or will we see another person ascend to the top of the podium? Of course, we look down to the grid. It will be Olaf on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, Yannick once again. D and Chronic Opal behind them, much like in race number 2. But watch out for Feel the Vibes and Yaya on the 3rd row. And also keep an eye out potentially for Ben MK starting P7. And what can he do in making up ground on this one? And it's lights out and away they go once again. And Yannick having a very poor start this time. And you can see that D is already going for a nice early move as they come up into turn 1 for the first time of asking. And Yannick having to go very heavy and defensive through the corner there. And he's able to make the place back as a result of taking that inside defensive line. But as everybody settles down now, Chronic Opal has lost out massively. And in fact, finding himself in P4 right now, as everybody go, oh, goodness me, I can't count how many cars decided to try and make moves there. But you can see that Feel the Vibes is up into P4 and we're all kicked off there. What on earth happened? We'll find out in a wee bit. But Yaya up into P5 and Ben MK up into P6. Luco find himself in P7 after starting well back on the field, and Stanley going for an adventurous move at turn 8 on ZenQ. And I think ZenQ will say, right, Stan, if you're going to give me a little nudge, I'm going to be giving you a little nudge back on the next lap. As they come up into turn 9, then which one of them's going to reign supreme into the corner? Well, neither of them are giving way right now. ZenQ going for the rallycross line here, and Stanley Stanley has gone very deep, and that means they're going to be battling into one. As we can see, Stanley has disappeared completely into the wall. So after one lap, it is Olav ahead of Yannick, then it is D, followed by Phil the Vibes, then Ben MK ahead of Yaya, and then we've got Luco ahead of ZNQ battling with Ian Chabuk, and then we've got Pies rounding off our top 10, and then we can see that Vitor Knight up into P11, Stanley in P12 after that instant out of the final corner, Chronic in P13, Chronic having a disastrous opening lap, and then Gomez in P14. Now we will take a look at what happened to Chronic and what kicked off at turn 4 and lap number 1 shortly, but we're just going to make sure we don't miss any early moves. As we see, Ben MK has got himself up into P5. He's got past Yaya, in fact, so Yaya has dropped a position, although Ben has gone very deep into turn 8 as Luco is battling with what is at the moment ZenQ, and Luco in P7 just doing enough to hold on right now. And Ben MK doing everything he can to try and keep Yaya behind him, but I think they're missing a trick here, the pair of them, in the fact they are losing the toe off of Phil the Vibes, and that means Vibes is going to start running away a little bit with this and the battle for P4, as Luco is holding on to P7 right now, but you can see ZenQ getting ever closer to the back of the British driver, the pole, looking for the move, as Ian and Pies have had a little bit of an incident. I think Pies has gone deep as a result. I don't know if there was contact there, we didn't quite catch that, but Ian has regained the position to P9, as behind them we can see that Vitor Knight has moved up into P11, Stanley in P12, and Chronic now looking for the move on Stanley as Stan goes deep into turn 4 on the third time of asking. But with the mention of Chronic, let's see what happened to him on lap number 1. So we hop on board then, coming up into turn 4. This is where it's all going to go horrifically wrong. And I think Chronic here just got knocked. Yeah, he got knocked off circuit. We're not sure who knocked him. But you see Chronic got knocked all the way out and then had to regain the car. And that's when it all kicked off, because they all concertinaed up into turn 4 and everybody was looking for a cheeky move here or there. But we now resume what we were watching up ahead, and you can see that things are already opened up, and Olav is going for it here. He's already is almost a slipstream's gap away from the other drivers here, as we bring up the fastest lap time as well, or we try to at least. And we're not getting the fastest lap time on screen, unfortunately, for you folks, so we'll have to find that out at the end. But what you can see is that Olav is trying to break away from Yannick, who in return has actually broken away from D quite sizably here, and behind them we seem to have a number of spaces between drivers, and it's Yaya who's causing a little bit of the cork in the bottle effect here, with Ben MK right now trying to find a way back past, but feeling the pressure from Luco behind him. The two British drivers going to war with one another and really needing to focus up front, because if they let ZenQ get into the mix here, well, it's going to open things up massively, because ZenQ, we know how bold he is with his moves. And that's not to his detriment, of course. ZenQ is one of the proudest overtakers on the field. And if anyone's going to go for a move, it will be ZenQ, as they're coming up to the end of lap number 4. And you can see they're settling down for the time being. And there's not really anything opening up right now. All of our drivers seem to be calming down a bit. And the gaps have opened up quite sizably on these opening 4 laps. And now we're going to wait to see who's the first to pit, because nobody's pitted yet, and we're waiting to hear who's going to come into that pit lane and try to use an undercut in order to get ahead of their rivals. As they're all coming down to turn number 4 then, and you can see that Yaya just doing enough to hold on. As we look back from Yaya's car right now, his previous lap being at 57.8. And you can just see how behind him Ben is just wobbling a little bit through the cornering sections here in the most intense handling section, which is sector 2, in the fact that he's got that dirty air to contend with off the back of Yaya's car, and that means Luco is getting closer. Luco seems a bit more composed in the dirty air of another car here. All of our drivers, of course, being in equal machinery. The only thing they're going to be changing is their brake balance and doing time management if needs be. But looking back, it doesn't seem as though Ben's able to get too close, but Luco has actually fallen back and is falling into the clutches of ZenQ, who's coming through right now and charging up towards turn number 1. And as we switch back to what is P9 at the moment, we can see that Pies ahead of Ian. Ian coming alive a little bit in the race compared to qualifying. Remember, Ian was the one who was really off the pace in qualifying, finding himself setting a P14, but now he's in the battle for a top 10 position. Good on Ian here, as Stanley behind is gradually catching, but not at a significant rate of knots, as I think there has been a little bit of an off somewhere, and in fact it has kicked off, and we can see that Yaya and Ben MK side by side through 5. Oh my good lord, and it's going to be absolute curtains if they don't calm it down into turn 8, and Ben has got the move done. Now that is phenomenal from Ben. And let's see what happened, because something kicked it all off, surely. So coming up into turn number 4, then you could see that Yaya was ahead sizably, and then he drifted into the goal, he went deep and then tried to catch it. There was a little bit of contact there, but nothing non-understandable. And then Ben decided to hang it round the outside through turn 5 and set up the move into 8. Well, that is something else from Ben, and that is why he is considered to be a very strong driver, and that's why he earned his place in EU Division 1 off the bat, as Luco also makes the move into turn 1 on Yaya, and Yaya has dropped 2 places over the course of a lap's distance. It has gone from good to bad for Yaya, but of course he could recover. What if there have only been 7 laps completed almost so far, and we've still got plenty more laps in the tank. And now, looking around at this point, we can see in our battle for the lead, D is falling further and further back into the clutches of Feel the Vibes. But meanwhile, in that... Oh, hold on a second. Luco going very deep, and I think he's just overcooked it under braking. We will, of course, find out what happened for you there shortly, folks. But that promotes ZenQ up into P7, as Luco's going to try and come back initially. And in fact, he's had a very good drag off the line, and he's going into the pit. So he is the first of our drivers to flinch, ladies and gentlemen. Luco pitting from what was effectively P8, as we can see that Chronic in a battle against Gomez and Vitor, the Australian surrounded by the Portuguese here and trying to find his way past the pair of them. And in terms of where has this brought Luco out the pits, well, Luco is just coming out the pits now, so that means really one pit stop is going to cost you in that best part of a region, I'd say of approximately, well, that looks like about 12 seconds if Luco took on a fresh set of tyres, and he did. So tyre change plus also just the pit stop is a 12-second deficit, or 10 to 12 seconds. That is not ideal for Luco, because he now finds himself coming out behind a huge battle, and he doesn't want to get caught in that. He will be praying with both fingers and toes crossed that the battle ahead of him calms down or ends, as Vitor and Gomez are fighting one another ferociously. Vitor going deep and Gomez going for the immediate cutback, and Chronic not able to capitalise, as there's no change between the 3 of them here as they come to the end of the lap. Are any of them going to pit here to go for an undercut? Of course, Luco will be praying for an undercut to kick off, and no, there's no change. But up front, meanwhile, we can see that Vibes still close to D. The Dutchman not able to get away from the Brit at this point in time. It looks as though D's really struggling just to switch on right now, as Vibes is all over the map, and D goes a little bit deep into turn 4. It won't be too costly, as Ben has cleared Yaya and ZenQ. In fact, Ben finds himself a second ahead of the battle for P6. Good on Ben there, because now that means it gives him a fresh bit of space to run away from them all. As behind you can see that Piers is now holding up Ian and also Stanley a little bit here. Alternatively, Ian and Stanley are using Piers as a pace car and just simply letting him move them along. And behind we've got Gomez and Vitor, who seem to have settled down, and Luco has made his way up into P13. I think it's gone wrong for Chronic Opal somewhere, because Chronic is all out of sorts at the moment and down in P14, and I think he's going to pull an emergency pit stop to make some magic happen there, because it's gone from good to bad to worse for Chronic right now, and the Australian is not having a good time, as we can see a number of drivers coming into the pits, and that is Pies and Ian into the pits. So 2 more drivers decide to take that pit stop on lap number 9, but oh no, and Luco's into the wall, and Luco is going to be dropping down the field here, as we can see that early pit stop has cost him. What the fact that he got caught up in the fight, and the fact he's just had that instant, and we're just going to take a look at what happened to Luco there. So as we ride on board then and we look forward, does he just simply get it wrong on the acceleration point? So coming into turn 9 then, down in 3rd gear, and he applies the power really early, and he just gets shot off the curb. He literally gets springboarded off of the apex curb, and that is a Luco into the wall. That is very unfortunate for the British driver. Now he's got it all to do once more, as he's got... I think somebody's looking the wrong way. Hold on a second, folks. We've got a driver looking the wrong way. That is Vitor Knight at turn number 5. What on earth has happened there to the Portuguese? And well, he's got into the wall. He's come out forward. He's just simply got into the wall there, and he's... Oh no! And that is very, very lucky for everybody else behind him, because that could have been disastrous. That was a close one to call down. I'm sure that Chronic will be grateful that he's wearing the brown pants right now, because that was a scary moment. As we can see then further around the field, we've still got Olaf up front, 1.6 seconds the gap ahead of Yannick right now. He's really starting to open up that gap, and D still being pressured quite a bit by Feel the Vibes. But of course, perhaps D is just managing his tyres right now and letting the dirty air off the back of his car destroy the tyres from Feel the Vibes. We're just going to take a quick look at our tyre gauges here, and you can see that those are Feel the Vibes' tyres. Meanwhile, D's are about the same, albeit he's got a bit more wear on his rear left, so he's not destroying Vibes' tyres In fact, both drivers are doing a very good job managing their tyres together. And behind them, as we look around, we can see that Ben still in that comfortable P5 as ZenQ comes into the pits from what was P7. Now, this, of course, will be critical because ZenQ pitted with a 9.5 second gap off the leader, but he was right on the back of our P5 and P6 battle. And that means as Chronic Opal comes into the pits, as Stanley looking to make a recovery effort out of this, and ZenQ going for a fresh set of boots, he's come out behind Gomez, and Gomez here is up into P7, but I believe he does still have to pit. But ZenQ will need to clear the Portuguese driver very, very quickly, because at the moment that could be disastrous for ZenQ. But if Gomez comes into the pits at any point, as we've got a number of drivers pitting on the halfway point now, then ZenQ could have pulled a blinder and find himself ahead of Ben MK or ahead of Yaya. Alternatively, if they don't go for additional tyres, then he'll find himself in a very strong attacking position as they come on to the end of the race. As we see behind our P7 and P8 drivers, we've got Luco and also Ian battling here, and Ian trying to park it on Apex but going deep and getting in the way of Luco. I don't think that's what parking on the Apex looks like normally, but Ian made it work, and you can see that Luco now really trying to find a way past, having to do so much recovery work after that disastrous incident on lap number 10. I believe it was 10 as he came out the final corner, but nobody else coming into the pits as we could see at this point in time. So it's settling down again, but we do know for a fact now that Olaf is really turning up the wick. 2 seconds being the gap between him and Yannick in P2, and D just not able to get away from Vibes. As we can see Ben now starting to fall back into the clutches of Yaya a little bit, but he's still got a seconds gap, so he's got room to play with, Ben has here, as Yaya is a long way back. And remember, Yaya is going to have to work so hard to get into the slipstream zone of Ben, and then work even harder to find an overtake. And right now, the guy they've got to be worried about is ZenQ, who is only 8 seconds off of Yaya right now in the battle for P6. Remembering that behind we've got Ian, and I think we've had Luco go off there. I think Luco's just gone too deep under braking, and he sent himself off into the Shadow Realm and finds himself rejoining in P11, and it's just going into a nightmare night for Luco here. And Ben MK now into the pits. Now, where does this bring Ben MK out in relation to ZenQ? It brings Ben MK, hold on a second, where's ZenQ? And I think that might be because of the fact Ben MK has not changed tyres. No, he has not changed tyres. So that gap, ladies and gentlemen, for reference between Ben and ZenQ is now in the region of 5 seconds. So that is the difference in terms of changing tyres. It is approximately a 5-second changeover in the pits. And that is going to be the difference between Ben and ZenQ for the time being. But ZenQ will now know he needs to push. Because, of course, who's going to also use this knowledge to their advantage? Well, it'll be Yaya, who will know that he will need to pit and not take tyres to stay in the fight to Ben, because he'll see Ben right in his rear view mirror, who is only 3.8 seconds behind. And Yaya into the pits immediately as Ben now comes through. And how's this going to chop and change then? We're about to find out. Ben coming around the final corner, of course, as up front we can see that Yannick has fallen back massively into the clutches of D and Feel the Vibes. But in the battle for P5, Ben emerges ahead of Yaya by 1 second, although he goes very deep and overcooks it into turn 1. And Yaya will be pleased with that, because that means that he's now in the slipstream zone off the back of Ben's vehicle. But we can see that Yannick has had a bit of a disaster at some point. Alternatively, D and Vibes have turned up the wick, and in fact, by doing so, I think it's more that D and Vibes have just caught up to Yannick, because Olaf is not that much further up the road. He was approximately 2 seconds ahead, but now that gap has opened up to 2.4, and D and Feel the Vibes will be feeling confident they can both be on that podium together as they're coming around to complete lap number 15. Behind, of course, we've got Ben, who's now holding on to P5, and really with 8 laps to go, well, sorry, not 8 laps to go, 7 laps to go. It'll be 6 laps when they come across the line. It's Ben who's now got to hold off Yaya for a long period of time as Gomez finally comes into the pits. He hasn't cost ZenQ too much time, to be fair, if any at all, but ZenQ has got a 3.5 second gap to close up on those fresher tyres. Can he do it? I suspect if Yaya and Ben start fighting, he will do it at a rate of knots, but it's all going to be down to whether ZenQ can put in those really fast laps, their qualifying laps he's effectively got to put in, and that Ben and Yaya fight one another. If they don't fight one another, then it's not going to change. But look who's jumped a huge chunk of the grid, and that is Gomez. By going so long and staying out of the fighting, and also staying on his current set of tyres, Gomez has jumped ahead of Ian Pies. He's jumped all the way up into P8. Very good tactical move by Gomez, but of course now he's got to try and hold on to P8 for the remaining 6 laps. Can he do it? Well, we'll wait and find out. And as we look a little bit further down the field, Luco's coming onto the back of this battle for P8, and Stanley's trying to get there as well. Chronicopal being 3 seconds off the back of Stanley, and then Vitor Knight in a very lonely 14th after that huge incident earlier on in the race. As we can see the little concertina train of Yannick ahead of D and Feel the Vibe still as they go on to lap 17. And behind them, of course, Ben leading Yaya for the time being. And all of our drivers right now will be feeling quite tired. Their braking feet will be feeling very heavy in the fact that they've been doing so much heavy braking throughout. And we can see that battles are starting to kick off once again with Pies and Ian battling into turn 1. And Pies going for the move and getting it done on Ian up into P9 now, Pies. But that means that Gomez gives himself a little bit of breathing room. Because remember, the more they fight, the more this enables Gomez to get away. And Gomez is now 9 tenths ahead of Pies, who's having to defend against Ian. And Ian going for a rally cross line there at turn 5, and I think that's going to be a track limit infringement if he's not too careful. But Ian right now jumping over, and Olaf at this point is, well, it's going to be up to all 4 of our leaders have not pitted yet, it should be pointed out. So unless they really start fighting, I don't see anything kicking off. But you could see that Yannick actually deciding to go very defensive into 1 there, and D right now coming right onto the back of Yannick, and Feel the Vibes being there as well. And I think it's going to kick off any moment now, because all 4 of these guys in our race lead group have not pitted, and Vibes finding himself getting frustrated, it would seem, that he wants to get past. He's got so much pace, and the guys ahead of him are just not unleashing it. But meanwhile, behind, we can see that Ben is still holding off Yaya and ZenQ in that lonely 7th, not gaining really on Yaya or Ben, even though he's got the fresher tyres. And Gomez comfortably ahead of Pies and Ian now. He's 1.5 seconds ahead, and really he can afford to feel comfortable in picking up this rather wonderful P8 for himself. As we can see, Ian now having to defend against Luco, and in the battle for our leaders, of course, nobody really changing, as we saw there that we've got Ian having to defend against Luco. We're just jumping back at that one and doing a good job as Ian in defending. But that battle for P2 right now, Vibes, hold up, what on earth has happened here? We've missed out on something major here. Have those drivers come to the pits? No, I think there must have been an incident or something, because Yannick and D have both dropped back dramatically. Now, I don't know whether they've taken one another out or what, but Yannick and D find themselves quite way back, unless there's been a pit stop and we just haven't seen it. We're just going to double check our information screens, folks, for you. No, there was not a pit stop. It looks as though there was an incident between Yannick and D we've missed off camera, and they've waited for one another, or something's happened, because Vibes now finds himself all the way up into P2, and he's going to be pulling off a major result here with only 2 laps to go after the current lap. And surely Olaf is into the pits, and Vibes is coming into the pits as well, and Yannick and also D. Yannick coming into the pits, and D going 1 more lap. He's going to go the maximum distance on that set of tyres before needing to pit. And well, it's literally turned the tables right now, because I think Olaf is going to... Olaf going for a fresh set of tyres? No, goodness me, that can't be possible. That means if he's going for a fresh set of tyres, then Vibes and Olaf are literally out on circuit together. Oh my good lord. And Olaf, I think, was going to go for the fastest lap or something to that effect. But that means he's got Vibes all over the back of him. That gap has closed up. And Yannick, meanwhile, has gone for that fresh set... No, he hasn't gone for that fresh set of tyres, sorry. He's fallen back even further because of the fact that he had that incident, which we didn't see, and he's in the competition with D. But Olaf will not have been expecting this, and he will literally need to switch those tyres on as soon as possible, because if he doesn't, then he's got the risk of Vibes potentially sneaking the win here. Remember that D will need to pit, so D is not going to be bringing this home onto the final lap in the lead, because he does have to make that pit stop. Or at least we reckon he does, unless he's pulled off a magical pit stop somewhere around the race. No, there's his expected pit stop. So it will be Olaf regaining the lead. And we now have to wonder, where is Yannick going to come out in relation to D? Because these two are battling for what was P3. And as he comes round then, who is it going to be who goes on to the final lap in P3? It is going to be, by the tiniest of margins, D, who's just ahead. And Yannick tries to throw it around the outside. He just can't do it. So it's going to be D ahead. Now, will he go for an immediate move? Because these two have been battling for so long. I can tell you Ben MK is still ahead of Yaya and P5 at the back of your camera shot, and D's gone deep, and it means that Yannick's going to have the run, but he's going to be on the outside for 5. He tucks back in immediately, knowing he can't get the move done there. Vibes is not close enough to Olaf. Olaf has done enough to hold off Vibes, unless he makes a mistake, of course, but I think he won't be, given his form so far. And Ben MK holding on right now, and Yannick not able to get the move on the inside into 8 on D. And I think it's going to settle down enough now. And I think, well, at this point, Yannick is flashing his lights. I'm not sure what's happening between those guys. But coming around the final corner for the final time, it is Olaf bringing it home 3 from 3. Ahead of Phil the Vibes, who's pulled off a blinding second place. Ahead of D in P3 and Yannick P4. And Ben MK has held on long enough for that P5 ahead of Yaya. And behind these two, it will be Zenku coming home in P7. And look at that, coming home in P8. The best result for him of the night, Gomez. And behind, Pies has held off Luco long enough, and Ian unfortunately couldn't hold off the charging Brit to P11, and it's Stanley in P12, Chronocope with P13, and then last but not least of our drivers is going to be Vitor Knight, who's just coming around right now to complete our racing order, coming into the final corner. And we are already hearing from the pit lane that there was a major incident between Patrick and Yannick, which is why they dropped off, and Feel the Vibes essentially gained that P2. But it is Vitor Knight who is coming home at the end of the field in P14. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our order, and congratulations for 3 out of 3 to Olaf from the United Kingdom. So after 21 laps, I can confirm to you that our finishing order, pardon me, minus any stewards' inquiries, is as follows. Olaf Biscuit bringing home 3 wins out of 3 tonight, ahead of Feel the Vibes and D, rounding off our podium. Yannick coming home in P4, and to round off our top 5, Ben MK. The fastest lap was set on lap 2, a 56.979, our fastest race lap of the night by Yannick. Goodness me. And just to clarify, so supposedly there was an incident whereby what happened was that D sent Yannick flying, and that's why the two of them ended up where they were. And I think there might be a little bit of a discussion with respect to conceding the place or things on those lines, because, well, you could see that Yannick was furiously flashing his lights at the end of the race there. I think he expected that the place would be given back to him at the end, but we'll wait and find out after the race. But that is our finishing order for tonight. And what a great race to end on, but so unfortunate to Chronocope. You have to imagine what the Australian may have been able to do if he wasn't sent off at turn 4 on lap number 1. And what a race by Ben MK and also Gomez. Both drivers just putting in a consistent race to get solid results in that finale. Gomez in particular with that P8 by simply running it clean in clear air and just having a good race as a result. And that means that we've only got one more thing to go tonight, folks, and that will be King of the Karts. And I'm going to take a very quick sip of water because I've got no voice left. But what a cracking set of races tonight, and I'm hoping my camera hasn't glitched. No, there we go. Brilliant. Just getting a quick warm-up lap in whilst we've got an opportunity to. But congratulations to you, Benji, or Ben MK, as we know you out on circuit, starting P12 in race number 1 and moving all the way up to a P5 at the end. Fantastic racing by yourself tonight, just consistent form, and you stayed out of the trouble. Okay, that's a practice lap done. Here we go. So King of the Karts is about to get underway, folks. To be fair, there will be a lot of incidents. I think if anything's going to get reported, it's going to be huge things that get reported from tonight's racing. But King of the Karts for now. And we get 3 laps. That's good to know. We see somebody go across there. I don't know who that was. That was an interesting racing line. I know there's no rules in King of the Karts other than try and murder everyone. And I got murdered. That's not to say I can't bring it back. Got to remember the kart's second gear is really tight. So I need to use third gear as much as possible. I got nudged. I'm going to be coming home last in this one. Well, I'll take a P10. And that is King of the Karts, ladies and gentlemen. But with that, really, that is all we've got time for in EU Division 1 today. I hope you have enjoyed, and, well, we've got plenty more action coming right at you, same time tomorrow evening, as we return to the circuit once more. Tsukuba plays host to EU Division 2, and we see what the rest of our European participants can achieve in the all-wheel drive Group 4 machines. But I've been your host, Paul TX141 Walsh, also known as Britain a Spit, depending on what media you follow me on. And until tomorrow, stay safe, stay well, stay smiling, but most importantly, remember to stay on track. Good night, everyone.